Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am talking about the most blurring powders ever. So these are my favorite powders, pressed and loose powders that are great for blurring your complexion, that are great for giving you that soft focus, filtered effect that make your skin just look really smooth and creamy. And they give that almost Instagram filtered, blurred look to your skin. So I like everything on the skin to look really refined and smooth. I don't necessarily like full coverage, so I like my skin to still look natural, but I just want it to look incredibly smooth in person. Like, I don't want to see texture, I don't want to see bumps on the skin. I want everything to look really smooth, but without having a lot of coverage, without having that really perfected look where it looks fake. I still want my skin to look like skin, so these powders are going to achieve that job. And powders are honestly one of the most important steps in your makeup. Powder can make or break a look. If you use a bad powder, it can absolutely ruin your look for the rest of the day. So powders are really specific in my routine and they're very important to me. So I don't mind spending extra money on a powder because, like I said, it can literally make or break your look. So I am just going to talk about my favorite powders. I'm going to start off with the pressed powders. So the first powder that is one of my favorites is this Sisley Blur Expert powder. So I have also filmed a video. I'm going to do like a whole blurring series, and I filmed this full look for you and how to get this filtered blurred complexion, and I use this powder in this video. So what I like to do with this powder is I actually like to use this as a priming product. So this is a baked powder, so it's very hard pressed. When you dip your brush into this powder, you're not going to see any powder flying up or any excess being kicked off because this powder is a baked formulation, so it's just a hard pressed powder. But the really unique thing about this powder is that it actually looks better when you use it underneath your foundation. So you apply this underneath your liquid products, and what it does is it perfectly smooths and blurs your complexion before you've applied foundation over top. Once you apply your foundation over top of this on top of this powder, you will see what I mean, because your skin just looks so smooth, so perfected. But again, it's perfected without it being a lot of coverage. Your skin just looks like this smooth filter. It is amazing. When I want my skin to look its best and the most special, this is the powder that I reach for to use underneath my makeup. It is truly a game changer if you want that filtered look. This also does work well over top of makeup as well. I would say I would mostly use it for a touch-up powder. It's just the powder, when you use it on top of your makeup, it's not the most long-lasting powder in the world, but this formulation is beautiful if you're looking for a great powder to blur your skin. The next powder on my list is something you have heard me talk about over and over again. However, this is a new formulation. So this is the Peau Refining Pressed Powder. This was recently reformulated like within the last month. It comes with this little puff, which you could use to apply the powder. I typically just like to go in with a brush. But my favorite thing about this powder is how it blurs the skin, like all of these powders. But this one does it in such a unique way where you honestly cannot detect any powder on your skin. This is an undetectable powder. So it really does a great job of blurring and filtering and smoothing out your skin without adding any texture, without adding any color or coverage, which is my favorite because I just want to basically have my skin look more perfected without it looking like I've applied more makeup. So this is the best powder for me. It really does blur the skin and it's imperceptible on the skin, which is phenomenal. So if you're someone that just really wants that blurring capability, that blurring technology without adding color or coverage, this would be my go-to. It is so lightweight on the skin. It is just a beautiful powder. It's extremely finely milled. I think these formulations, so this was the old powder. You can see how I've gone through that one. I think they're very similar. I can't really detect a difference on the face especially, but I do really like this new packaging. Peau is revamping their formulas, so I'm really happy with this. I think it is amazing, and if I had to pick just one powder, this would be my holy grail, my absolute go-to. This is something I just can't recommend enough. So this next powder on my list is the Westman Atelier Vital Press Skincare Powder. This is in the shade Creme, so this does come in different shades. There's a translucent, there's a pinky tone, and I think there's a deeper tone as well. I chose this because it matches my skin tone the best. I would say this powder is a great blurring powder if you have very mature or very dry skin. If you have oily skin, this will not be enough to blur your skin. But when my skin is exceptionally dry, especially in the winter months, or if maybe my skin's just, I don't know, if I put a little bit too much like retinol on or too much skincare and my skin's just feeling really dry, this is a powder I'll reach for because it will blur the skin, but it is such a lightweight powder. It's actually a very creamy powder. So it's almost this type of powder that turns into a cream once you've applied it on the skin. That's the closest thing I could describe it as, I guess. But it is incredibly lightweight, and it is, again, an imperceptible powder. You can't detect this powder on the skin, which is why I don't think it will be blurring enough or heavy enough for someone with an oilier skin type, because I think the oil will just come through right away. But if you're someone with very dry skin or more mature skin, this would be a great powder because it is so creamy. It's quite a hydrating powder, and it's very unique for a more creamy powder or a hydrating powder to actually have that blurring technology to it. So this would be a fantastic option if you are someone with extremely, extremely dry skin. The packaging is beautiful. It's very luxe as well. Now, another powder that is one of my favorites, this is actually limited edition packaging. It comes in just like a pebble compact now. This is the Chantecaille Perfect Blur Finishing Powder. So this one I really love when I really want to have my skin look very creamy, very perfected, and very smooth. So this is another great smoothing, blurring powder. They're all great smoothing and blurring powders. That's the purpose of this video. But this is one if I want that extra perfecting look. So maybe if it is a more special occasion, because the thing about this powder is it is a baked powder. So again, similar to the Sisley, you're not gonna have a ton of powder kick up when you dip your brush into this. So this powder works best when you press it into the skin like this. This powder doesn't work the same way in the Sisley. This works better on top of makeup, so to really set in your makeup and just blur the appearance of imperfections or texture on the skin. But the unique thing about this powder is that it has a little bit of coverage and a color to it. So this will add a little bit of texture to your makeup. It will add a little bit of coverage, a little bit of color. So it will alter the appearance of your foundation a little bit. So this is something I tend to reserve if, say, I'm having a bad skin day. Maybe I'm having a little bit more breakouts than usual, or my skin's just a little bit irritated. I definitely feel more confident when I reach for a powder that has this little bit of extra coverage to it, because then I know my skin will still look really smooth and blurred, but it will just give me a little bit of that extra protection when I have a little bit more going on with my skin. So this is still a powder I love to reach for when I'm feeling just a little bit more insecure with my skin. It is definitely a powder that you don't want to apply all over your face because it does have that color and that coverage to it, so it will look heavy if you apply it all over the skin. So I like to just go in with a small brush and just, again, you press it into the skin. That's how you're gonna get the best blurring effect, is when you use these powders by pressing them into the skin, just using a little bit of product at a time, just going in with that small amount in those specific areas where you just require powder. But this is another favorite powder. If you're someone with discoloration, if you're someone with acne or rosacea, this is the blurring powder I would recommend to you. It is really beautiful on the skin. And if you go in with that small amount, you still get that perfected, smooth, blurred look to your skin without it looking heavy. So you just go in with an easy hand and you can still get that beautiful natural result. Another pressed powder that I really enjoy, it's not my all-time favorite, but I feel like it's a good powder to mention. This is the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Finish Powder. A lot of the powders I've mentioned you can get only at certain high-end stores. This one you can actually access at Sephora, so I thought it would just be a good one to mention, and I feel like this is just a powder everyone knows about. It's not a holy grail anymore. It used to be. This is a powder that's very powdery, so you'll actually run through this one really quickly. But this is a really nice powder if, like, I'm going on vacation and I don't want to use my special powders. Like, all those powders I mentioned before are my special powders that I don't want to say I save, but they're like my special occasion powders. They're my favorite powders of all time. This is just a really nice powder that does the job of blurring. You can apply this all over your skin. It's not a heavy powder. It's just not my absolute favorite because it does smooth and blur the skin, but it doesn't do the same job that those other powders do. This just gives you a very soft blurred look. So it still gives you that bit of soft focus, but it's just not as blurring and as pore perfecting as those other powders I mentioned. But if you're someone that doesn't like that kind of look, I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you don't, this would be a good option to just slightly blur the skin, but it's not going to look as filtered as I usually like. But I thought this would just be a good one to mention. It comes in a few different shades. I wear the shade 2, and this is just a good standby that I just like to take if I'm maybe staying overnight somewhere. If I am going traveling, because I don't care. I don't want to say I don't care if I lose that powder, but if something happens to it, I won't be terribly upset. But it's still a good all-around powder. Now this next powder is a really special powder. So this is the Chantecaille Lotus Perfect Blur Glow Powder. And I say this is a special powder. Well, first of all, it's limited edition, so please get your hands on it while you can. I already have a backup of this powder. You can see I have hip pan on this. This is a special powder because this is a glowy powder. So all the powders that I mentioned before have a more matte finish, maybe even some on the like velvety side, but this has a bit of a glow to it. And that's unique when it comes to a blurring powder because most of the time when you think of a reflective powder or a powder with a sheen, you think it's going to emphasize texture, and that's typically what a glowy powder does. So this is almost a brightening powder. It's definitely a bit lighter than my skin tone, and it has an ever so soft sheen, but the sheen in this just refracts the light in a way where it reflects off your skin and just blurs the look of your skin. So because of the way it reflects off the skin, it does just blur the skin in this very unique way. It is such a pretty powder. I really like to use this just as a highlighter alone, just on the high points of my cheeks. Or I like to just use it as a buffing powder. I'll buff all my makeup. Again, I am doing a demo video, so you can see this when I show you how I've applied my makeup. But this is just a fantastic powder. So if you're someone that likes a more glowy powder, this would be a great one for you because even though it's a glowy powder, it still blurs the skin in this beautiful, soft focus way where your skin just looks so smooth and so creamy. Such a unique, fabulous powder. Now this is another baked powder, so you're not going to have a lot of powder kick up with this. And it's just a great, it's so flattering on the skin, and because it's that baked powder, it really does meld into the skin and becomes this creamy, gives you this creamy quality where your skin just looks very smooth and gorgeous. One of my favorite powders of all time. I really hope they make this permanent because it's so good and I don't want to be without it. Now I did want to mention some loose powders as well. So I have a few favorite loose powders. The first one I want to mention is probably my favorite loose powder. This is the Rodial Glass Powder, the loose setting powder. I really enjoy this powder because it is extremely finely milled for a loose powder. It is just so light in texture. And even though it is called a glass powder, there's nothing shimmery about this powder. It is very refined on the skin. It gives you this beautiful, smooth quality. I will say that I prefer to use loose powders underneath my eyes. I find that using a pressed powder on the under eyes is just a little bit too heavy for that area. So a loose powder, because loose powders are fairly finely milled, I find that they're a better option to use under the eyes. Also, with loose powders, they're not my favorite to use all over the face because I find that they just don't give enough of that blur that I really like. So that's typically why I use pressed powders all over the face, and then loose powders I reserve for under the eye. But even though this powder I tend to reserve for just under the eyes, it is beautiful all over the skin because it does give that really gorgeous blurred effect. I would say this is my most blurring loose powder. It is just such a unique, gorgeous powder, and it's not a heavy powder, so if you're someone with dry or mature skin, I feel like this would work really great for you. So if you're someone that's kind of shied away from loose powders, this would be a fantastic option for my drier or mature skin friends. Definitely try this one out. It's very unique. It has this hydrating property to it, even though it is a powder. It will not leave you looking dry on the under eyes. Such a great one. My other favorite loose powder is the Huda Beauty. This is the Easy Bake Loose Baking and Setting Powder. I have the shade Pound Cake, but I do actually I have the mini size of the Cherry Blossom Cake. I kind of prefer this for my under eyes, and I feel like the new, they just released a peach shade. I feel like that would probably be the best, so I will be purchasing that next. This is a powder that is honestly fantastic for blurring the skin, especially the under eyes, like I said. However, I would say if you have dry or mature eyes, I think this might be a little bit too heavy. So I would recommend staying with the Rodial powder or some of the other pressed powder options that I recommended because those are lighter weight. However, if you're someone with oily skin, this would be fabulous because it really does just blur the skin on contact. It is such a great powder. Again, this has a very finely milled texture to it. The formulation is extremely finely milled, so it's thin on the skin. It just really sets those under eyes, but it doesn't look heavy. It doesn't look cakey. Again, I feel like you might have a bit more issues if you're really dry, because sometimes I notice in the really dry winter months, I do just have to step away from this powder because it's just a little bit too drying. But for oily skin, this would absolutely be fabulous. It really does blur the skin, and it's not a heavy powder either, like I said, insanely finely milled, so this is gorgeous as well. So the last powder I want to mention is the Givenchy Prisme Libre Loose Powder, and I wanted to mention this because I know people will ask me about it. So I have this powder in my collection, but I have to admit it is not my favorite I will say it does do a great blurring job on the under eyes. However, the one thing I do not like about this powder is that it has little shimmer particles to it, and I can detect those shimmer particles on my under eyes, so I can just see all these little shimmer flecks, and I really dislike that because I do like the powder formula. I think it's nice and blurring. Again, I wouldn't apply this all over my skin because I just prefer a pressed powder, but for the under eyes, just if it didn't have that shimmer, I would enjoy this powder. I did want to recommend it because whenever I do a powder video, people always are like, what about the Givenchy powder? So I wanted to, I guess, just talk about it and tell you why it's not my favorite. However, if you're someone that doesn't mind shimmer particles on your skin, and again, it's not like super noticeable, but if you're out in natural daylight or if you're really close next to someone, like if you're just talking to someone in person, I can detect it. But that might be just because I'm very noticeable of those things. I'm very aware of those things. But if you're someone that doesn't mind those little shimmer particles, then I think this is a really nice powder as well. I do think it's a better option than the Huda Beauty if you're someone with really dry under eyes as well. But I have to say my number one powder is definitely the Rodial loose powder. But those are all my absolute favorite blurring powders for smooth and filtered skin. I would love to hear from you. Let me know your favorite blurring and smoothing powders. If I haven't tried any of them, I would absolutely love to try them out. Now, I do want to mention, I just saw M Cosmetics came out with a pressed powder that's a blurring powder, and I did just order it. So I'll definitely update you on that one when it arrives to me. The shipping to Canada is typically like so slow. So I'll see how long it takes. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Like this video if you like it, and I'll see you on my next video.